In this video, we're going to talk about how to author our own custom shapes into the Content Center to be utilized inside of the Inventor frame generating tools. Here I have the Structural Authoring IPT from our Working Files directory. What I have created so far is an industrial shape profile that a lot of engineers are familiar with. And what I'm going to begin is a simple extrusion. Doesn't have to be very long. It could be very short, like 1 inch. I'll say okay to that. There are a couple of things you should be aware of when you're creating these shapes and these profiles. Try to keep them simple. The more faces and edges you add to it, the more detrimental that can be to your overall performance. So if I had every single little fillet, groove, nook, and cranny inside of here, it might be very difficult on my system to have all those different faces and edges. So here I have a pretty simplified version of this industrial shape. Now, once you have your initial sketch created, you have your overall extrusion created, very small extrusion. It's now time to start the authoring process. Now, when you author this particular shape, you have to have a library that it can be placed into inside of Content Center. So if you haven't already created a read-write library, now's a good time to do so. Once you create the read-write library, you have to have a copied category structure of the structural steel available in that library to publish this one into. You can create subfolders inside of it. You can put it wherever you want inside of that node, as long as it's underneath structural shapes and structural steel. Now, the authoring process here is quite easy. If I go to the Manage tab, on the Author panel, there is a flyout. There's 4 different authoring methods here. I'm going to choose the structural shape authoring. I have to specify what category to put this into. So what is it? Is it an angle, an I-beam, other? Well, I'm pretty sure this qualifies as an other. Had I created a folder ahead of time, that would actually show up here. The folders are created in the Content Center editor, not inside of this particular dialog. It went ahead and picked my base extrusion for me. It also has my default base point selected here as well, my predefined point, or I can also go ahead and select the geometry and pick that center point. What's important about that is when I'm using Frame Generator, that's how it's going to adjust its orientation during the placement methods. I can also create a notch profile. In this particular case, I don't ever notch this type of steel, so there's no need for a notch profile. If you had one, you would create it as an additional feature that would represent your notching material that you would remove during that interaction of an end treatment. Over on the Parameter Mapping tab, I have to specify which parameter is my base length, which is essentially that 1 inch that I created. This will aid in the process of creating the base unit calculations and proper quantity and length calculations when I get to my documentation. For here, I'll choose these 3 dots, and I'll simply select my parameter for that overall length. For now, I will choose D34, but it is beneficial to pre-name them ahead of time so you know which value is what. I'll choose OK, and it's going to tell me that my part file has been modified for the use of structural shape authoring and it's ready to be published in. It created a log file in this location for me as well. I'll choose OK, and I would like to just verify that my D34 was correct. So I'll go up to my parameter box and I'll look for D34, that was my 1 inch. And sure enough, that did work out to be the correct length for me. As I mentioned, it would have been better for me to name this something like length ahead of time, so it would have been easier for me to grab in that dialog. We now have a part that is ready to be published in to Content Center. On the Content Center panel, on the end of the Manage tab, I can choose the Publish Part command to publish this to my custom library. Here I'm going to place it into the Other folder. If I took time ahead of time and did the Content Center editor and created a folder underneath structural shapes, I could have chosen that instead. For now, Other is just fine. I'll choose Next. My base length parameter is going to be linked to that length parameter. Choose Next. If I'm going to place this from Content Center without Frame Generator, how do I want to specify the way that it comes in? Well, I would like to be able to fill out the base length. I don't really care too much about material and part number, but if you wanted to, you can definitely add those as well. So I'll leave base length right now. I'll choose Next. Here I can specify my family description, which will be the same description the file gets into the iProperty for description after this is generated. I can also fill out the family folder name, the standard organizations, the revision, the standard, the manufacturer, so on and so forth. For now, I'll just choose Next and Publish. So now it's been placed into my Content Center folder inside of my database for Content Center files. If I were to go to perform an open from Content Center, if I browse to Structural Shapes, Other, and scroll down, I will see my structural authoring file has been created here for me. Now you could also do this with an iPart. So if you had variation to your sizing, you could do that very quickly. A lot of these files have sizing variation to them. That was just an individual, one size, particular type of structural shape that I did there. For now, I'll choose OK. I can specify my base length. I can choose an As Custom and drop that in as well. And I'll just save it here in my directory. I get a style conflict. I'm just going to say OK to that. And here's my 1.ipt that was generated from that. If I close this, and I'll close my structural authoring file as well, I'm going to not save my changes to this particular one. If I start a new assembly, any old assembly is fine. If you look at your Design tab, Insert Frame, just do a quick save on this one as well. You can pull an unnamed standard because I didn't fill it out, and there shows up my structural shape to utilize in Frame Generator. Obviously, take a little bit more care as you're authoring it and publishing it, especially if you want to create it as an iPart with variation, because right now I only have the one available size.